May 18th, 1936, Tokyo, Japan. In a rented room, the body of a man was discovered. Upon closer inspection, his passing was anything but natural. Though it wouldn't take much effort to find the culprit, the person who had done the heinous deed had carved a message onto their victim. The message was a single kanji, and it made it clear that the perpetrator was a woman. Her name was Sada. But before we can advance further, I have a question for you. What does love mean to you? How about obsession? Or perhaps possession? What do those things mean to you? In 1930s Japan, one woman took dedication and possessiveness to a new and extreme level. Her name was Abe Sada. Her crime was so perverse and bizarre that it shocked Japan and has gained some level of notoriety abroad, enough that you potentially know some of the details of this case. Today we'll be speaking in depth about Abe Sada, or at least as much as YouTube will allow me. Like I said, this is a pretty grotesque case, at least for men especially, so let's get into it. Abe Sada was born in 1905 in the center of Tokyo. Her family was wealthy, but that doesn't mean that she was destined to have a happy life. From birth, she seemed to be a little bit odd, by not being able to speak to her family until about the age of 4, and she also had a really nasty temper. In response, her mother and father tried to baby her, but Abe Sada was always going to be quick to action with very little thought of what the consequences could be. In part of this babying, her mother made her take shamisen and singing lessons. At the time, this was associated with lower class work like geisha, but the particular style that she had learned, Tokiwazu Bushi, is associated with Tokyo Kabuki. But as much babying and praise the temperamental Abe Sada got, it seems like there was a general sense of isolation. She was the youngest child of 8 kids. By the time of her birth, her oldest living sibling was 20 years older than her. At her family's tatami mat shop, Abe Sada would play her shamisen and sing, getting the nickname Osachan, and becoming known as a talented and beautiful young girl. Soon her parents became prideful of their daughter's skills and allowed her to focus on her singing and shamisen playing rather than her schoolwork. And in some ways, this can be isolating as well. This is perhaps why she became so independently minded so early on, dropping out of school at only 15. However, around this time, something horrible happened. One day, Abe Sada was visiting her friend, Fukura Namiko. There at her home, there was a Keio University student named Sakuragi Ken. The university student managed to corner Abe Sada when she was alone on the 2nd floor. There, he assaulted her. This had a profound effect on the still 15-year-old Abe Sada. Though her mother tried to give her gifts and give her money to make her feel better, it didn't work. When their attempts to get this young man to make amends for what happened all failed, this only pushed the young Abe Sada into a state of anguish, spending many days sleeping and crying. In time, she had emerged with a new sense of anger at the world. Every day she would wake up at around noon, and her parents would give her an allowance. Then she would go out with her friends to Asakusa. In Asakusa, she would see movies at Japan's first skyscraper, the Yoon-kaku, drink at bars all night long, and generally run roughshod all over the Tokyo metropolis. Time and time again, she would get into fights with her father and cause problems. Her parents were desperate and didn't know what to do. Eventually, they got her a job working as a domestic servant, but she stole from her employer and was sent back home. After being fired from her domestic servant job, she was essentially locked into the home for a period of about a year, with the exception of a period when she was deceived by a man and brought to a hotel, with the obvious result occurring. This isolation imposed by her father didn't work, and so she rebelled again, taking a string of boyfriends in quick succession. This is when her father decided to take her to an acquaintance, a man named Inaba Masatake. Inaba was a man who worked as a zeigen, an intermediary for the shops in Japan's red light districts. He bought Sada from her father, and from that day forth, Abe Sada began to work as a geisha and as a prostitute. During this period of time, sex work was totally normalized in Japan, and many cities had large red light districts. The work of professional prostitutes was regulated and they were tested for diseases on a monthly basis. In fact, until the 1910s and 1920s, the Karayuki-san, Japanese prostitutes, were all over Asia. These women, primarily acquired through a zeigen, were largely from rural areas in Japan which had an extreme disparity of wealth between the wealthy landowners and the poor tenant farmers. But Abe Sada wasn't from a rural area. She was from a well-off area and from a well-off family in Tokyo. And she wasn't a government-registered prostitute, she was just a geisha, for which prostitution was typically reserved for lower-level geisha. She wasn't sold for monetary reasons either. She was sold because they were exasperated with her, and felt that this was the one way to solve the Sada problem that the family had. Her zeigen, Inaba Masatake, frequently entered her room at night and the two would have encounters. It doesn't seem like she had an issue with this, but he had a large debt over her. The money given to her family for her sale was now the debt hanging over top of hers. She got work at a geisha house near the port of Yokohama called Hajimino. There she worked under the professional name Miyako. However, in spite of her singing and shamisen skills, she wasn't given much of a chance to use them. Instead, most of her work was as a prostitute, and not always a willing one. She grew very quickly to hate working as a geisha. Her dream as a child had turned into a nightmare. She continued to visit the Inaba household on a regular basis, but one event in 1923 would destroy the relationship Abe Sada had with Inaba Masatake. On September 21st, 1923, there was a great shaking, a massive earthquake on the Kanto plain. Tokyo, which is mostly built up of wood housing, suffered major damage. The shaking was so severe that the Ryoonkaku that Abe Sada had visited often in her youth had collapsed. In the aftermath of all of this shaking, fires spread throughout the rubble, and huge firestorms spread throughout the city. It was as though the gates of hell had opened up. It was the Great Kanto Earthquake. By the end of the day, 100,000 people had died in the tragedy. Abe Sada survived, and so did Inaba Masatake and his family, though their home had been burnt down to the ground. Abe Sada transferred to a new geisha house in far-off Toyama City, raising a great deal more than her first geisha house's offer. With that, she paid off her debt from the first geisha house and handed over the remaining cash to Inaba Masatake for him to look after. But Inaba used the money to pay for he and his family's living expenses. So now she was not just down the leftover cash she had, she was also indebted to this new geisha house. For 2 years, she worked feverishly at the new geisha house before moving to her third and final geisha house in 1925. This wasn't something that she wanted to do, mind you, but something that she had to do reluctantly. Inaba Masatake was still her zeigen. It seems like Inaba put his stamp onto an agreement, and thus she was obliged to go and work there. At her final geisha house in Ida City, she would contract an STI and suffer a mental breakdown, breaking expensive hairpins in the watch of a customer. The STI and hysteric mental breakdown put an end to the geisha lifestyle, at least for a while. During this temporary retirement from her work, she told her parents what had been happening with Inaba and the reality of geisha life. After many arguments, Abe Sada decided to just become a full-time licensed prostitute, and so she ditched Inaba as a zeigen and got to work as a high-class prostitute in Osaka in 1927. In Osaka, she fared better there, becoming a popular girl there. One of them even discussed the possibility of buying her out of her debt with the establishment, but it all went wrong. One of the man's subordinates at his work was also a regular of Abe Sada, so the buyout proposal fell through. And so she ran away from the establishment and moved to another one. The customers were never good at any of these brothels, but regardless, as she moved from brothel to brothel, they only ever seemed to get much worse. Never mind the management. Things only ever seemed to get worse for Abe Sada. Her last brothel, Abe Sada ran before the debt could be repaid, putting her in danger of being dragged back to work at the establishment, whether she liked it or not. She went into hiding in nearby Kobe, but with this came a transition out of the world of red light districts and into cafes and restaurants, and also becoming a professional mistress. But this was a slow process. As she transitioned away from having relations with men every day, Abe felt a sort of strange confusion about her new life. She wasn't used to being alone so often. She went to a doctor to try and resolve those feelings. Remember, from the period of about 1921 when she was 16 to the early 1930s when she was in her mid-20s, she was sleeping with men multiple times per day. I've read figures actually of at some of these establishments of having maybe 20 or more customers per day. The doctor just suggested that she undergo some mental training and read some books on morality and then get married. Well, thanks, Doc, I hadn't considered that. Not long after that, in 1933, her mother died. The following year, her father fell ill, so she returned to her home in Tokyo and took care of him in spite of all the trouble that he had caused her. But all of this occurred while she was still on the run from the people from the brothel. At least once, she had been followed to her parents' home and had to run away. Not long after, her father passed away. She heard that the daughter of Inaba Masatake had passed away as well, so she made a visit. Abe still fell for Inaba, so when she saw that he was still hurting for cash, she pawned an expensive ring a suitor had given her. Soon the two were restarting their relationship, but it didn't seem that her stay with Inaba Masatake lasted very long. You see, all of this time, she stayed being a professional mistress. In fact, she had so many men wrapped around her finger that a suitor had sued her for non-performance of engagement, which in Japan, believe it or not, is something that you can sue for. In fact, one of the last men she was a mistress for was a man named Kasahara, and he became so possessive that he threatened to hunt her down and kill her unless the pair stayed together. So she fled from Tokyo to Nagoya, hoping that Kasahara didn't find her. She was a woman on the run, a woman with no home or family to take care of her. Her only skill in life was finding men and sucking up whatever money she could get from them. Then, moving on to another. She found her latest mark in Nagoya, at a restaurant she was working at called Kotobuki. This man's name was Omiya Goro, member of the Nagoya City Council and principal of a major private high school in the city. In fact, he was so rich and influential that he had a legitimate chance of entering Japanese national politics. Although Abe did not know that at the time, Omiya kept that part of his life hidden. Omiya was also surprisingly gentlemanly. This was totally different from what she had grown accustomed to in men. Omiya didn't know it, but Abe fell in love from almost the first sight. Upon his second visit to the restaurant, she told him a story, a sad tale, about how she was a single mother, and that she was only working in this sort of place to earn money for her fictional son's sake. Omiya gave her money to buy her fictitious child a toy, but in reality, he had bought Abe Sada. When he returned to Kotobuki a few days later, Abe resolved to seduce him right there in the private dining room. The two, well, you know. Abe was a stand-up guy and was probably the only man to ever really take care of her. He even scolded her for continuing to work as a kept woman and as a prostitute, suggesting that she rehabilitate herself and get a normal job at a restaurant. Eventually, Abe went to work on him. She lied and said that her son had died, asking Omiya for some money and then returning to Tokyo, to the home of a former customer of hers. Abe and the former customer started a physical relationship, under the nose of Omiya and the former customer's wife. The two even started living together. Omiya didn't interest her in a physical manner, clearly. But after he visited her in Tokyo when she saw him off at a train station, she became very intrigued. On his chest, he wore a pin with a symbol, the Maru Hachi, the symbol of Nagoya City, meaning that he either worked for the city in a high position, or was perhaps an elected politician. When she saw a news article about Nagoya City Councilman Omiya Goro going to America, she knew that she had hooked a big fish. This was the ideal person she could have if she were to be a mistress, stable, gentlemanly, and wealthy. She decided to keep Omiya close. Ultimately, this would lead to Omiya's downfall. Abe and Omiya kept going back and forth from Tokyo and Nagoya, separating occasionally on account of Omiya's work. When she was alone, Abe was able to dine and entertain herself on Omiya's dime. He even paid for her to visit the Kusatsu Onsen, which is said to have curative waters to relieve some of her symptoms of syphilis. It was a huge expense for Omiya to keep Abe around. Every time she saw him, she would get several hundred yen. That's several $1,000s in today's money. She would even hit him up for additional cash for various expenses, meaning that every month Omiya was shelling out thousands and thousands just to keep her around. For Omiya, she quit smoking and had to be receptive to Omiya's requests that she straighten herself out. Her rehabilitation would be best achieved, Omiya reasoned, by starting out as an apprentice and then starting her own small restaurant. Abe Sada, to her credit, decided to make an honest attempt at reforming herself. But this is where things really do go all wrong. She went to a Shinjuku-based employment agency and requested a job at a serious establishment, even if it meant that she got less money that way. And by serious, I of course mean not engaged in prostitution. The employment agent quickly snagged her a job on the 1st of February 1936 as a live-in waitress at a restaurant under the false name of Tanaka Kayo. At this restaurant, she learned her new responsibilities and met the owner, Ishida Kichizo. Ishida was a womanizer and was quick to make his move on Abe. At first it started with playfully blocking her way in the hallway, poking her, and so on. Then it escalated further and further and further. But before Omiya's visit on March 3rd, the pair hadn't yet done the deed. They waited at least a month. How classy. When Omiya visited, he and Abe stayed together in a hotel room. However, Omiya had shaved his head in a sign of dedication to some sort of studying he was doing and said that he wouldn't be doing anything with her for the time being. Abe said that it would be impossible for her to be without a man for a month. Omiya replied that if she had found a suitable man, that she should give him a sort of a test drive, so to speak, and then marry him. When Omiya left Tokyo, Abe Sada and Ishida's affair continued on, kissing and fondling each other whenever they got a chance. The two had become inseparable. In mid-April, the two were finally able to get alone together, and Sada gave him a singing performance, one in the kabuki style that she had been learning since she was a kid. Then, for the first time, the two got to know each other intimately. The next day they did it again, and soon the relationship between the two was becoming obvious. By April 19th, the pair were caught trying to get intimate and the whole situation fell apart. Ishida tried to repair his relationship with his wife on the surface, but in secret, he was already planning a way to meet with Abe in secret. On April 23rd, the pair met together in a secret location, a rough equivalent of a love hotel in those times, a machiai. But it's important to note that these were not quite the same thing. A machiai was just a secluded single room that you could rent out. This could be used for business meetings, parties, and for what Ishida and Abe used it for. These were just simple tatami rooms for the most part. When they met, Abe Sada went straight for the jugular, calling him husband. This is what Omiya had suggested that she do, it just wasn't going to end how he expected. Ishida told her not to call him husband. Initially, that was the case. The pair drank for a bit, and then Ishida said that since tonight was their wedding night, they should call a geisha to entertain them. The next thing that is described in the record that I'm primarily working off of described what Ishida and Abe did that night together. But given that this is YouTube, there are certain things that I can't discuss very much. I'll just put it this way. Ishida subscribed to the theory that a brave warrior shouldn't be afraid of a little bit of blood. From the 23rd to the 28th of April, the pair engaged in continual debauchery, only stopping to eat, drink, or sleep, occasionally inviting geisha over to entertain them, usually while they were, doing it. The climax of this bender was while Ishida was holding Abe, and she looked up into his eyes and said, "To make sure you never do a good thing to another, shall I kill you?" Ishida replied, "If it was for your sake, do it. Don't do that. Don't say stuff like that. Don't put that out into the world." After that intense foreshadowing, the pair separated for a time. Ishida had to go back to his wife and pretend that he wasn't spending his time with Abe, and Abe had to go to Nagoya to see Omiya, yet again staying at an inn under a fake name. She used fake names frequently, and between her professional names and other fake names, she probably had at least 10 different names throughout her entire life. This time, Omiya just gave her money and promised to meet her in Tokyo in early May, on the 5th. Abe immediately returned to Tokyo on an express train, sending a telegram to Ishida to make sure that he picked her up at the train station. She didn't want to wait even a single second. They went to a machi-ai again, spending the entire night doing anything but sleep. In particular, she tied his hands with rope, which apparently made Ishida excited. The following day, the two parted. For the next few days, the two were separate, but on the 5th, the pair spent the entire day doing... I think you get the idea by now. But something very odd happened at that point. Abe grabbed a pair of scissors and snipped near Ishida's private parts, jokingly acting as though she was going to cut it off. Ishida thought it was funny and laughed, at least according to Abe Sada. Remember, pretty much all of this information comes from the criminal in question. Also to remember, this was the day that she was supposed to meet Omiya. Omiya had been stood up, waiting 4 hours and then getting dinner by himself. When Abe went to meet with him, Omiya seemed to suspect that something was wrong, but didn't comment. Instead, he demanded that she begin her preparations to start her own restaurant, promising a lump sum of 1,000 yen if she did so. It's a pretty big amount of money back in the day, by the way. Abe got more money to fund her and Ishida's escapades from Omiya, and the two promised to meet again on the 15th at the Tokyo train station. Then she went back to Ishida and the pair went at it again. But soon they prepared to part. Ishida felt bad for mooching off of Omiya, so he went home and mooched off of his wife instead. What a sweet guy. Except they weren't parting just yet. For the entire 6th of May, Abe and Ishida spent the night walking around Tokyo, drinking, moving from establishment to establishment as they both grew more and more drunk before returning to their machi-ai until it was 9 in the morning. Then, Abe left for Inaba Masatake's home. The two had something of a normal friendship now that she was like a daughter to the family. She even called Inaba Masatake her father. Yet, still, even at the Inaba home, Abe was incapable of escaping Ishida in her mind. She could think of nothing but him, of who he was, of what he could do for her, how skilled he was. She spent most of the day feeling jealous and thinking about him. Not even 3 bottles of beer would allow her to sleep, so instead she spent the entire night smoking and reading magazines. She was scheming, trying to find the best fit for her in Ishida. She couldn't be Ishida's mistress, she felt it was boring. She wanted to be his wife. But the only way that could happen was if Ishida ran away with her. But she also knew that Ishida would never do that. The idea of killing Ishida popped into her head, and she couldn't let go of it. On the 10th, she went to a play in Asakusa, but she couldn't pay attention. No matter what, Ishida kept popping into her mind. She was hyperfixated on him and couldn't escape. The only thing that she took note of was the appearance of a deba knife in the play, a knife commonly used for dressing fish. The following day, she went out and bought one of her own. That night, she called Ishida and demanded that they meet. When she arrived at the meetup location, just seeing him made her fall down with delight. Then, she took the deba knife from her bag and said, "Kichi, you wore that kimono just to please one of your favorite customers. You bastard, I'll kill you for that." At first, Ishida seemed frightened, but then he seemed interested. Once again, this was from the words of Abe Sada. The pair went to a restaurant and ate, finishing off 3 bottles of alcohol with their meal. Then they headed to a machi-ai, this time to the Arakara ward, in the northern extremity of the then Tokyo metropolis. The two continued with their usual activities, doing different lewd acts together and drinking alcohol, never doing much in the way of sleeping or eating solid food. In fact, in the middle of this escapade, Abe somehow found the time to meet with Omiya and have relations with him. This was out of obligations, because after all, she still needed his money, but yeah, they were still doing that as well, so she was going from one guy to another. Ishida and Abe continued like this for 7 days, from the 11th to the 18th of May. During this period, Abe began to choke Ishida with her koshihimo, part of her kimono sash. Ishida didn't actually enjoy this, it hurt him, but he said that if Abe enjoyed it, then he would let her keep doing it. Yet, when they finished the session, Ishida's face had become congested with blood, so he asked Abe to go and get him some medicine. When she went to a nearby pharmacy to get medicine to help with this, she was told that only bed rest would heal him, so instead she came back with sleep medicine. When she got back, Ishida said that he was sad that day. He couldn't afford to play around anymore. Abe tried to keep him happy by giving him some sweets and a watermelon that she had bought when she went to the pharmacy. She borrowed a knife from the waitress at the machi-ai to slice up the watermelon. Before he slipped off to sleep, Ishida turned to Abe and said, "When I sleep, wrap the koshihimo around my neck and choke me. If you start to strangle me, it hurts, so don't stop." He meant this as a joke, it seems, but for a moment, Abe Sada thought that he might have been serious. The following day on the 17th, Ishida kept saying that he had to go home. They had to temporarily separate. Abe broke out into tears, convinced that this was his way of trying to break up with her and separate for good. Ishida said the separation was temporary, but either way, Abe had her mind made up. A month, 2 months, she could never wait for him. If she couldn't have him, then no one could. On the 17th, she stayed up all night, even after Ishida had went to sleep. She was so happy that she cried in the dark. She found someone whose love felt like they had met again after 100 years apart, according to Abe, anyway. At 2 in the morning, on May 18th, Abe made her move. While Ishida slept, knocked out from sleeping pills, she wrapped the koshihimo around Ishida's neck and lifted him up, partly on her back, using gravity to provide leverage as though she was carrying a bag of potatoes. He cried and begged for forgiveness, partly out of sorts because of the medicine. Abe Sada released him and let him slump back down onto the ground. This wasn't because she no longer wanted to hurt him, but because she couldn't stop trembling. She drank a cup of sake and went at it again, lifting him up and pulling tight. This time, Ishida made a groaning sound. He was dead. Abe was gleeful at what she had just done. Later on, she recalled a strong sense of relief. After the crime, it was as though an indescribable weight had been lifted off of her shoulders. She drank some beer and then played around with Ishida's private parts before falling asleep beside him. When she woke up again, she played with his body once more. This time, she realized that she wanted to take Ishida's private parts with her, so she went to work. Abe took the knife that she had borrowed earlier and then sliced off both of Ishida's private parts. She wrapped them up in magazine paper so she could take both parts with her wherever she went. With Ishida's blood, she wrote Sada and Kichi alone together on the sheets, then Sada and Kichi together on his left butt cheek. Then she finished off her handiwork by carving the character of her name into his left arm, Sada. She stashed the knife underneath his head and then looked upon what she had done. Starting on April 23rd until May 18th, the pair engaged in an almost uninterrupted hedonism. For Sada, it was a dream world. Now, after almost a month, the stark reality of what had just happened was dawning upon everyone but Abe Sada. Abe put Ishida's underwear and shirt on underneath her kimono and then went to the staff of the establishment. She told them that Ishida was sick and that he shouldn't be woken up until the afternoon. Then she departed. Abe Sada met with Omiya that day, still carrying her important package from Ishida. For a reason that she didn't understand, all she could do was cry and apologize. Omiya didn't seem to understand. For him, it was actually a very happy day. He had finally left his job as a principal and was apparently in high spirits. Together, they went to a private room at an inn and went at it. Abe didn't enjoy this, yet again it was out of an obligation to him. During this encounter, Omiya remarked that the room smelled a little odd. She hid the package that she had taken from Ishida in the room with them. Yeah, the two parted ways. Abe Sada one way, and Omiya another, never to meet again. Before Omiya was able to fully enjoy his day, Several hours later, the police arrived and took him away to the local police station. There he would undergo a deep and intensive interrogation by the police. It seems that they had the idea that it was perhaps he who had committed the crime. Meanwhile, Abe walked around Tokyo as if nothing had happened. She bought new clothes, ate sushi, and even drank coffee. In Hamacho Park, she sat on a bench and considered what her next move was, unaware that the police were actively searching for her. That night, she found a room in Asakusa, the neighborhood that she used to hang out in as a rebellious young teen. While in her room, she continued to play with Ishida's body parts, but found herself unable to sleep. She mostly cried. The following morning on the 19th, the news was first published nationwide. The bizarre and extreme nature of the crime, as well as how strange the criminal was, attracted the immediate attention of the public. This lady was off her rocker, and she was still on the loose. All over Japan, people reported seeing Abe Sada, partly because of the panic, but also because she was a fairly generic-looking Japanese woman. So, it made it easy to misidentify her. Though she wanted to flee to fling herself off of a mountain while holding on to Ishida's member, as one does, soon she read an article on her and realized that she couldn't leave. There were cops stationed at every train station and they were all hunting for her. The net was closing in, and fast. On the night of the 19th, she received a massage, drank 3 bottles of beer, and wrote 3 letters. One addressed to Omiya, another to a friend of hers, and one to Ishida. She had intended to take her own life that night, but in the end she drank a bottle of beer and fell asleep. She woke up on the 20th, and at 4 in the afternoon. She then immediately walked into the local police station and turned herself in. The details of the case were highly sought after, with people looking for a reason for Abe's actions, suggesting that perhaps Ishida was remarkably well endowed. But the truth was far from that hypothesis. Abe stated that he simply had the best technique for making her feel good, and that the reason was so that he could always be next to her wherever she went. Those were fairly lucid answers considering what she had just done. However, when she was detained after turning herself in, they tried to clean her clothes. Under her kimono, she was still wearing Ishida's clothes and underwear, so when they tried to take them, she became hysterical and violent. Though her mental state wouldn't matter anyway, this is Japan in 1936. Her mental state was of no real interest to the court. Instead, the trial became something of a public spectacle. 1936 was also the year of Japan's most dangerous coup attempt, the 226 incident, so in many ways, Abe was bizarre and grotesque, but almost a funny sideshow to the much larger events going on around her. In fact, many of the details of Abe and Ishida's bedroom activities flowed out to the public via the papers. Throughout the whole trial, Abe said that she wanted a death sentence for what she had done. Her final statement stressed that her crime was not done for pleasure, but because she never wanted to be parted from him. In the end, the sentence handed down was shocking. Though recommended a longer sentence, she received a sentence of only 6 years for murder and desecration of a corpse. Because of the extremity of her fame and how many men in Japan had become enamored with her for some reason, probably her unquenchable appetite for sex, when she was transferred to serve her sentence at Tochigi prison, she was sent while wearing men's clothing and in a special car. Even behind bars, she was rarely kept at a prison for very long. Typically, she was moved every few months. In fact, during her imprisonment, she was sent some 10,000 fan letters and requests for marriage and had become representative of the climax of the Ero-Goro nonsense phenomenon, erotic grotesque nonsense. Though there was never a real chance of someone trying to break her out or anything like that. Behind bars, Abe Sada's grip on reality was tenuous at best. She was known for her strange behavior, especially on the death anniversary of Ishida. On at least one occasion, she tossed water on the guards with a bucket and then rolled around on the floor while screaming. Discussions with the prison chaplain led to Abe regaining some of her grip on reality, and her newfound interest in Nichiren Buddhism, celebrations commemorating the 2600th year since the founding of Japan by the mythical Emperor Jinmu, yes, this did happen, and it was a very big event in Japan, resulted in Abe Sada being pardoned after only 4 years into her 6-year sentence. But that's not the end of the story. This new Japan that she had entered was totally different than the one she had known. It was a Japan at war. What I'm saying is that Japan had forgotten about Abe Sada. Under the false name Yoshi Akiko, she lived a quiet life, actually living at the home of Inaba Masatake and his wife, who in effect had become her surrogate family. While working at a restaurant in Akasaka, she met an office worker and she moved in with him, settling down as effectively a housewife. The war was rough on Japan, especially the Tokyo area, which the US firebombed into smoking rubble. But for Abe Sada, things were fairly calm on a personal level. To everyone concerned, she was just a quiet housewife. Abe Sada might as well have been dead and gone. Until 1947. After the Second World War, when censorship weakened significantly, a style of pulp magazines known as Kostori Zashi began to spread throughout Japan, focusing on eroticism, BDSM, and even true crime stories. Abe Sada made the perfect story to tell. Articles about her gradually began to trickle out to the public, and people began to remember Abe Sada once again. A particular pulp book entitled Miss Sada's Erotic Confession seemed to annoy her more than the others, and so, with the help of Inaba Masatake, she sued the author and publisher in court for defamation, winning shortly thereafter. However, it appears that these articles and the lawsuit resulted in the man she was living with realizing that his wife was Abe Sada, and so he left. But the lawsuit had done little to end the publishing of works about her. In fact, instead, she ended up writing her own autobiography, doing interviews, and even putting on a stage production. Soon, a new generation of writers and artists began to see Abe Sada in a different, more sympathetic light. She had even begun to perform at different bars and was ultimately hired for a bar where she would be paid absurd amounts of money to work as a sort of premium in-house entertainer. In fact, she reportedly took many younger lovers, using them for financial support. By the 1960s, she had her own bar and had close connections to people like Buto dance originator Hijikata Tatsumi, frequently being visited by politicians, sumo wrestlers, and even people connected to the case. In 1969, she made her first and final film appearance.
殺してくれって何度も私に言ったんだからね。だからあそこを出る時にね、何かを持ってきたいという気持ちになるのはこれは当たり前のことでしょ。何かその人をね、人間をぶっとくわけにいかないわね。そしたらやっぱり男のそのものを持つしかないわね。ちょっと浮気とかちょっといいなと思うのはあるでしょうね。いっぱいそれは人間ですけどね。けども真から好きだってのは一人じゃないかしら。ごめんなさい。
However, not long after this, Abe Sada disappeared. By 1969, both of the Inabas had died, and the following year of 1970 brought her to financial ruin when a younger lover stole a large amount of cash. There are many theories about what happened to her, ranging from her becoming a nun to her living out her days at an Izu old folks' home. The only valuable piece of information seems to be that since 1955, on Ishida's death anniversary, flowers have been sent to Kuonji Temple by an anonymous party. These flowers only stopped being delivered in 1987, 16 years after her disappearance in 1971. In 1976, the internationally acclaimed and suitably explicit film In the Realm of the Senses was released, helping to re-establish the fame of Abe Sada in the newer post-war generation. Even now, Abe Sada and the case surrounding her is well known in Japan, with common opinion being that she was a total maniac. And to be truthful, I can't say that I blame them for thinking that. She was clearly a very troubled woman who did something very awful. As always, the Charlie Dogwood channel provides stories on crime, corruption, chaos, conspiracies, and of course, cool stories. If that sounds good to you, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing the video. Also, feel free to check out my Twitch, YouTube gaming channel, and stream VOD channel. All links are in the description. I would also like to take the time to say thanks for everyone who subscribed and all the support. It's all appreciated. So thank you very much, I appreciate it. I'll talk a little bit more about gangsters soon. I just don't want it to be the main content of the channel. But without further ado, check out this video. It's pretty good. Good stories only. Thank you.